Hello guys, so here's the new version of the Wolverine that's going to be released soon, so February 15th. So quickly, there's a bunch of new features here. As you can see, the sheath is an upgrade from the older version, and we'll compare both in another video, but quickly you can see that there's 2 rows of eyelets this time, so that's a good feature. But more importantly, this time on top of the SK85 steel, we're also offering it in a steel that we called A8Max. So what exactly is A8Max? We'll talk about that in this video. All right, so the quick version of it is that A8Max is Aichi made AUS8, for which we use an optimized heat treatment to optimize toughness but still retain a good edge retention for use in mid-sized knives. So what is AUS8? We'll do a bit of history here. So AUS8 was developed by Aichi, a company in Japan, in the 1970s. It's a high purity ingot steel. So it has many other names. Some people call it AUS8A, 8A, or A8. So that's what we use, A8. And it was used since the 1970s to make high quality knives from Japan. Some might know about the SOG seal knife used by the Navy SEALs. So it was made in AUS8. It's a very robust and high toughness knife. So since then, there's been a development by Chinese companies of a copy of AUS8 called HCR13MOV. So often used by Chinese companies to make knives that they call AUS8, but often made out of HCR13MOV, or often even other steels like 440A. That's a problem in China. You never know exactly what you're going to get. But often these knives had poor heat treatment, and sometimes that led to some people having bad experiences with AUS8. So in reality, they weren't even getting AUS8, so the Japanese AUS8. They were getting a copy, and a low quality copy at that. All right, so let's go over the composition of A8Max or AUS8. So basically it has about 0.7 to 0.75 carbon, 13 to 14.5 chromium. So it's obviously a stainless steel, so it has more than 12% chromium. It has molybdenum, 0.1 to 0.3, some vanadium, 0.1 to 0.26. So that helps for grain refinement in the steel. Has some nickel, 0.49, some manganese, 0.5, and some silicone, 1%. It's a steel that's low in phosphorus or sulfur, so very low in impurities. And that's a different compared to the Chinese-made steels that are less stringent for these impurities. All right, so here's some data I got from the Knife Steel Nerds website of Lauren Thomas, where he compared AUS8 to different steels. The stainless steels are marked here in red, and the non-stainless in black. So you can see that for stainless steel, AUS8 has some very good toughness, much higher toughness than 440C, S30V, or LMAX. And if you compare it to a carbon steel, still has a very high toughness, much more than 01 or 1095. It's very comparable to A2 tool steel. So the edge retention is still pretty decent, still better than 1095 or 01, and very similar to A2. So in essence, we could say that AUS8 is a stainless steel version of A2, which is an excellent steel for mid-sized blades. All right, so if you want to know more about HCR13MOV or AUS8, I recommend you go to the Knife Steel Nerds website, where Lauren Thomas did an in-depth review of these steels. One thing that's interesting you'll see in his review is that he had a lot of difficulty obtaining pure 813CR MOV. Most of the knives that are labeled with that are not actually that steel. They could be 448 or something else. So that's something that's important. If you buy a knife from China, you're not sure what you're going to get. So one thing about Viclin and Work Tough gear is that we never cut corners. So we get our AUS8 directly from Aichi Steel in Japan. And every time we get a batch, they send us the composition analysis so we know exactly what we're getting. On top of that, we worked with our heat treat vendor to develop the best heat treatment we could for AUS8, optimizing good toughness and good edge retention. And every time we get a new batch of blades heat treated, we obviously test them for HRC hardness. Alright, so let's start some real world testing of the Wolverine in A8Max. So as you can see from the factory, it's got excellent sharpness, no problem cutting that paper. I went on to do some cutting tests. If you can see, it's effortless to cut that paracord. You know, it goes through like butter. Even if you double it up, it's a pleasure to cut with. So I moved on to some harder plastic rope, and again, as you can see, it just goes through super easy. We use some natural material here, some sizzle rope, and it cuts it quite easily as well. And then moved on to heavier rope, the one I used to tie down my canoe, and just slices the thing super easily. So I then went on to do some more serious testing, some batoning. So I used some hardwood. Here you had a piece of maple, and it went through quite easily. So as you can see, it doesn't take much force. You go in and then it acts like a wedge and really splits these pieces. Here I had another piece that had some knots. It took a bit more effort, but again, it split them quite easily. So even though it's a robust knife with a 5mm thickness spine, it still has a fine edge with a very nice convex. And you can use that fine edge to make some very nice feather sticks. It's pretty much effortless. You can make some super thin feathers that you could easily light with a ferro rod. So the geometry on that edge makes it really good for camp tasks. So if you need to prepare some tent stakes and you need to make some L7 notches, it's going to be super easy. You can see it really slices through the wood, no problem at all. So the Wolverine has a very sharp 90-degree spine. As you can see here, has no problem sparking the ferro rod, making huge globs of sparks. So it's definitely going to work very well when you need to light tinder to make fires. So even though the Wolverine's not a chopper by design, it's a mid-sized blade, it still has some excellent chopping capability. As you can see here, it's pretty effortless to go through that 3-inch branch. And we're in winter here, minus 10 degrees Celsius, so it's pretty cold. That's pretty rough on the steel, but it performed no problem. Right, so to further test the blade, we did some baton chopping and torquing the edge while we chop. So that puts a lot of strain on that edge to verify the edge stability. Really had no problem with that, and a very good tool to baton chop and to get through some wood. And baton chopping is a good technique to use when you're in constrained spaces. You can't really chop freely, so instead of moving the knife, you move the baton. It's probably a much safer thing to do. Alright, so next we wanted to test the strength of the tip. So we did some stabbing into this frozen log. So that was pretty rough. But the knife performed very well, as you can see. We're able to wreck that log, and the tip remained absolutely perfect. Next step is chopping through ice. So sometimes when you do winter camping, you need to get some water. So you got to get through the ice, and so it could be a bit rough on the edge. But we did a lot of chopping through the ice with absolutely no edge deformation, no edge problem whatsoever. So that's pretty nice. So finally, we wanted to test the lateral strength of the blade and of the A8Max steel. So we batoned the knife in this tree there, and it took my whole weight. So with the boots and all, it would be around 210 pounds. And we did it a couple of times, no problem at all. So definitely, I have high confidence in this blade. It performs very well, just as well as the SK85, and it's stainless steel on top of that, so it's very nice. All right, so in conclusion, what can we say? So after all this testing, I can say with confidence that A8Max is a very high toughness stainless steel, has some very good edge retention on top of that, and has the benefit, of course, of being stainless compared to the other steels we use. So many people are asking us for a good stainless steel option, and AUS8 is definitely a good option, as we can see here. And on top of that, compared to all the new CPM steels, it has great toughness, and we're able to keep the price very reasonable. So I think these are very good features of that steel. So next drop will be February 15th. We'll have them both in SK85 and in A8Max. So if you're interested, go check out the Work Tough Gear website. So thanks a lot.